A long time ago, people looked up at the night sky and wondered about the moon. It was a glowing, mysterious place far away from Earth. For thousands of years, nobody knew what it was really like. Was it made of rock? Was there life? Could people ever go there? Well, on July 20th, 1969, something incredible happened. Humans walked on the moon for the first time. This amazing event was called the Apollo 11 mission, and it changed history forever. In the 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union, now called Russia, were in a space race. Both countries wanted to be the first to explore space. The Soviet Union sent the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space in 1961. The United States wanted to do something even bigger, send astronauts to the moon and bring them back safely. So NASA, the American Space Agency, worked hard to build a spaceship that could make this journey. They created the Apollo program, a series of missions to test rockets, spacesuits, and equipment. Apollo 11 was the mission that would finally land people on the moon. Apollo 11 had 3 brave astronauts: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Neil Armstrong was the commander and the first person to step on the moon. Buzz Aldrin was the second person to walk on the moon. Michael Collins stayed in the spaceship, called the command module, circling the moon while the others explored. These astronauts trained for years to prepare for this dangerous and exciting trip. The astronauts flew to space on a giant rocket called the Saturn V. This rocket was as tall as a 36-story building and had enough power to carry them all the way to the moon. On July 16, 1969, it launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida with a loud roar, shaking the ground as it rose into the sky. The astronauts traveled for 4 days through space before reaching the moon. They were in a small spaceship inside the rocket, floating in zero gravity. On July 20, 1969, the spacecraft reached the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbed into a smaller part of the spaceship called the lunar module, nicknamed Eagle. As they got closer, they saw craters and rocky ground below them. Armstrong had to carefully guide the Eagle to a safe spot. Finally, the lunar module landed, and Armstrong reported to NASA, "The Eagle has landed." A few hours later, Armstrong slowly climbed down the ladder. He stepped onto the moon's surface and said the famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Buzz Aldrin joined him, and together they explored the moon. They saw gray dust, deep craters, and a bright sky with no clouds. There was no air, no wind, and no sounds, only silence. The astronauts had a lot of important work to do. Collected moon rocks to bring back to Earth, took photos of the moon's surface, planted an American flag to show that they had been there, set up experiments to study the moon's environment, jumped around to see how different walking was in low gravity. They spent about 2.5 hours walking on the moon before going back to the Eagle to rest and prepare for the journey home. After finishing their mission, Armstrong and Aldrin blasted off from the moon and rejoined Michael Collins in the command module. The spacecraft then headed back to Earth, traveling another 4 days through space. On July 24, 1969, Apollo 11 splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean. The astronauts were picked up by a U.S. Navy ship and became instant heroes. The moon landing was one of the greatest achievements in human history. It showed that with hard work, science, and teamwork, humans could travel beyond Earth. It also led to new inventions like better computers and space technology that we still use today. After Apollo 11, 5 more missions sent astronauts to the moon. The last one was Apollo 17 in 1972. Since then, no one has walked on the moon, but NASA and other space agencies are planning new missions to return there in the future. The moon's gravity is 6 times weaker than Earth's, so astronauts could jump really high. The astronauts' footprints are still on the moon because there's no wind to blow them away. The U.S. flag they planted likely faded because of the harsh sunlight. The Apollo 11 mission lasted 8 days, 3 hours, 18 minutes, and 35 seconds. NASA is now working on a new program called Artemis, which aims to send astronauts back to the moon and even prepare for missions to Mars. Who knows? Maybe one day, you could be an astronaut and walk on the moon too. The moon landing was a big step for humanity, and it all started with a dream. The next time you look up at the night sky, remember that humans once stood on that glowing ball in the sky, and one day, we'll go even further.